He thought he knew everything about life, success, power, and love. Until one rainy afternoon in Boston, when he followed the housekeeper he had employed for 5 years and saw 4 children running out to her, calling Mom. 4 children with the same smile, the same dimples on their cheeks, and the same. Thompson saw his nose every morning in the mirror. Just one fleeting moment, yet it was enough to shatter an entire life and begin a journey he had never imagined he would take, becoming a father to 4 children he never knew existed. Mornings in Boston always carried a distinct chill in their light. The glass buildings caught the early autumn sun, casting golden reflections, while the city moved in its usual rush. Below, as if no one had time to look up at the sky, in the 38th floor suite of Thompson Tower, David Thompson tightened his tie and looked at his reflection. Immaculate, composed, flawless, just like every other day. "Mr. Thompson, the meeting with the project team's been moved to 9:30. Miss Winters has confirmed dinner at Rossetti at 7. Linda's voice, his middle-aged assistant, came through the intercom. "Thank you, Linda," he replied, eyes still fixed on the wide glass window. Far away, the surface of Boston Harbor shimmered under the light. David Thompson, 30 years old, is the youngest CEO of Thompson Development Group, the prestigious real estate firm founded by his father. People called him the man with the golden touch, a genius with numbers born for success. And indeed, everything in his life fit neatly into place. A thriving career, a luxurious penthouse in Beacon Hill, and an engagement to Rebecca Winters, the daughter of a prominent banker. In 6 months, they would have a wedding the Boston press had already dubbed the social event of the year. Only one small, unexpected thing began to fracture that perfect plan. Something from someone he had never paid more than a passing good morning to, Jasmine Williams, the 4-year-old housekeeper who worked for him 3 days a week. That morning, as David reviewed blueprints for a new riverside condominium project near the Charles, he heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." Her voice was soft, a little husky, carrying a gentleness that made the apartment feel less empty. She appeared in her simple uniform, holding a caddy of cleaning supplies. "Morning, Jasmine," David replied, not looking up from his laptop. They rarely spoke. She came, worked in silence, and left on time. Everything about her was predictable, like the rhythm of a train schedule, but today was different. Near noon, there was a gentle knock at the door of his office. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to leave a bit early today." He looked up. "Is something wrong?" She avoided his gaze. "It's a family matter." In 5 years, Jasmine had never once left early. David was taken aback. "That's fine. Go ahead," he said. "I hope everything's all right." "Thank you." The door closed, leaving behind the faint scent of floor cleaner and a silence that seemed heavier than before. David tried to refocus on his work, but couldn't. "Family," she'd said. In 5 years, he had never heard that word from her lips. No husband, children, or relatives, or so he had assumed. The sudden urge to know what her life looked like beyond this apartment was strange. By afternoon, the rain had come. From the lobby window, David saw Jasmine run into the street, her thin coat quickly soaked as she hailed a taxi. Something unexplainable stirred inside him. Before he realized it, he was in his silver BMW, following the cab through the rain-drenched streets. The city blurred behind the windshield, the elegant districts giving way to older, humbler blocks. The gleaming restaurant signs disappeared, replaced by brick walls, small stores, and the faint yellow glow of Dorchester's lights. The taxi stopped in front of a red brick, 3-story building. Jasmine paid the fare, bowed to the driver, and hurried toward the door. David parked across the street, hidden behind the rain-slick glass. The old wooden door swung open, and 4 children rushed out. "Mommy's home." The words pierced through the rain. David froze. 4 boys, about 5 years old, identical as drops of water. The same light skin, dark brown eyes, dimples when they smiled. And dear God, the same nose and forehead he saw every morning in the mirror. A pulse throbbed in his temples. The world tilted. "This can't be," he whispered, gripping the steering wheel. The door closed behind them. David sat there, listening to the steady rhythm of rain, fragments of memory flickering 5 years ago, the company's lavish year-end party. The music, the lights, the laughter of a waitress when he made her smile, a handshake, spilled wine, a blurred night, and then nothing. He couldn't be sure, but the timing matched. His phone buzzed. Rebecca. "Hey, dinner's still at 7, right?" David looked toward the small building across the street. His voice was tight. "Yeah, I'll be there." But when Rebecca said "love you," he found himself staring only at the darkened window on the other side of the road. That night, the rain didn't stop. The penthouse gleamed with warm light, but David felt trapped in a hollow cold. Blueprints lay unfinished on the table. The image of 4 small faces wouldn't leave his mind. The next morning, he cancelled every meeting. Linda was puzzled when he said he'd work from home but was waiting for someone else. At precisely 8, the door lock clicked. Jasmine entered, looking more tired than usual. When she saw him standing in the living room, she froze. "Mr. Thompson, I thought you were at work." "No, we need to talk." She set down her cleaning supplies, her hands trembling slightly. "About what?" "About yesterday." Silence filled the space. "You followed me." Her voice was quiet, a mix of anger and fear. "I saw you leave, and then I saw the kids." Her eyes flickered. She turned away. "You shouldn't have come here." "Jasmine." He stepped closer. "Those 4 children, they look like me." She was silent for a long time before softly saying, "Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Born that year." David's breath caught. "They're mine?" She nodded, eyes glistening. Shock washed over him, part fear, part something deeper, heavier, guilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him, the look of someone who had carried too much for too long. "You're David Thompson, Richard Thompson's only son. I was just a temporary waitress back then. After that night, I had no way to reach you. When I found out I was pregnant, I left. I didn't want anything from you, but for 5 years, you've been working in my home because I needed the job, and because I didn't want my children to go without. I meant to tell you, but I knew I didn't belong in that world every time I saw you talking about $1 million projects in your suit." David turned away, gripping the edge of a chair. "You stole 5 years from me." "No," Jasmine said softly, voice trembling. "I protected them from a world that could have swallowed them whole." Outside, rain began again. They stood only a few feet apart, yet continents stretched between them. The door suddenly opened. "David?" Rebecca's voice. She stepped in, holding her wedding planner notebook. She stopped when she saw Jasmine. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company." Jasmine stood quickly. "I was just cleaning." "No," David said at once. "Rebecca, wait." Rebecca's eyes darted between them. "What's going on?" David drew a long breath. "Rebecca, I have to tell you something." He told her, brief, urgent, every word cutting through the air. The more he spoke, the paler her face grew. When he reached the words 4 children, she set the notebook on the table, slipped off her diamond ring, and said quietly, "I hope you find happiness in your choice, David." Then she left without looking back. The door shut. Silence. David turned, but Jasmine was already gone. Her caddy and a damp cloth lay on the table, leaving a faint water trail toward the door. He sank into a chair. Outside, Boston roared and breathed and lived on, but inside that penthouse, an entire world had fallen apart. That night, he didn't return to the office. He sat in the dark, staring at the horizon over the Charles River. On the table, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Jasmine, names of the boys: Matthew, blue; Mark, green; Luke, red; John, yellow. I thought you should know." Attached was a photo, 4 small faces on a couch, dim light, but every feature clear. David stared at it for a long time. Everything, his logic, his pride shattered. "Matthew, Mark, Luke, John," he whispered, as if reciting something sacred. The rain still fell outside, but within that quiet room, something new had begun to grow: a decision, a responsibility, and perhaps a kind of love he never knew he could feel. Boston woke to a cold, clear dawn the morning after that rain. Sunlight poured through the thick glass walls of the Beacon Hill penthouse, glinting off the man still sitting at the table, eyes sunken from a sleepless night. The coffee beside him had long gone cold. His phone still lay there, the screen frozen on a photo of 4 small faces. David Thompson had never felt so powerless. He could negotiate with global corporations and move millions with a single call, yet now 4 little faces in a picture were enough to make his hands tremble. He rose and splashed cold water on his face. The man in the mirror staring back at him was no longer David Thompson, the successful CEO of Thompson Development, but someone who had lost everything without knowing quite how. The phone rang. "David, where are you?" Rebecca's voice anxious, fragile. "I'm home. Can I come over to talk?" A brief pause. "All right." 20 minutes later came the knock. Rebecca stepped in, dark circles under her eyes, her blonde hair tied neatly back. She looked around the apartment, the faint scent of cleaning alcohol, a damp towel still hanging on the chair, and the weary face of the man she once believed she would spend her life with. "Are you going to stay silent forever?" she asked, her voice shaking. David didn't answer right away. He poured her a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. "Rebecca, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" She gave a bitter laugh. "For betraying me? Or for having 4 children with another woman for 5 years without me knowing?" "I didn't betray you," he said softly. "That night. It was before you and I met." Rebecca was silent momentarily, then sat down, hands clasped tightly together. "Do you understand what this looks like, David? The entire Boston finance circle will talk. Everyone will see my father, the press, and your company as a scandal. I don't care. You don't care." Her voice rose, anger flashing through her tears. "What about us? Everything we planned? The house, the wedding, our future? Are you throwing it all away for her?" David looked up. "No. I'm trying to take responsibility for what I've done." Rebecca stood, tears tracing down her face. "Responsibility? Do you think society will see it that way? To them, you'll be another man who couldn't control himself." She slipped the engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the table. "I can't marry a man like that, David." "Rebecca, please don't." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "Keep the wedding, if you still believe in it." Then she walked out. The door closed with a dry click. David stood still in the quiet apartment, morning light cutting through like a blade. The ring glimmered on the table, bright, but meaningless. Something inside him cracked, not because he had lost Rebecca, but because he realized everything he had built was a wall separating him from who he truly was. That afternoon, he went to his parents' office in Beacon Hill. His grandfather's portrait, the company's founder, hung solemnly on the wall. Richard Thompson sat behind a dark wooden desk. Victoria, his mother, stood by the window, elegant in a pale grey dress. "David," Richard said without looking up, "I just received word that Rebecca Winters has called off the engagement. You seem to have something to explain." David swallowed hard. "Rebecca left because she found out I have children." The room froze. "What did you say?" Victoria asked, her voice low but sharp. "I have 4 sons, 5 years old. They were born after that company party." Richard set his pen down slowly. "With whom?" "Her name is Jasmine Williams." "Williams?" Richard frowned. "The woman who works for you?" "Yes." The silence that followed was thick, only the ticking clock breaking it. Then Richard spoke, each word heavy as stone. "What do you intend to do?" "I'm going to acknowledge them, and take care of them." "You've lost your mind," Richard snapped, standing. "You're about to marry into one of the largest banking families on the East Coast, and now you'd throw that away for a housekeeper." David met his father's gaze, calm, resolute. "Not a housekeeper, the mother of my children." Victoria stepped forward, her tone softer. "David, sweetheart, I know you're in shock, but think carefully. We can handle this quietly. She can be compensated fairly, and the children—" "No," David cut in. "They're my children, Mother. I won't handle them like a failed project." The room fell silent again. Richard turned away, his voice icy. "If you go through with this, don't expect the company or this family to stand behind you. I will not have the Thompson name dragged through such filth." David buttoned his jacket. "Then I'll stand on my own." and he left, leaving behind a stunned silence. That night, Boston was drenched once more. On the road over the Longfellow Bridge, headlights glimmered across the slick surface of the river. David drove without knowing where he was going, only that he couldn't stay still, while the image of 4 smiling faces haunted him. He stopped before the red brick building in Dorchester, where he'd first seen Jasmine and the children. Warm yellow light spilled from a second-story window. Unable to resist, he stepped out, standing across the street, watching. Through the window, he saw the 4 little ones gathered around a table, while Jasmine sliced fruit, her soft voice floating through the glass. "Who wants more orange juice?" The sight made his chest tighten. He no longer saw status or difference, only a home, something he realized he had never truly known. Then his phone rang. It was Michael, his best friend. "David, where the hell have you been? The rumors are all over the company." "What rumor?" "About the housekeeper and the kids. Rebecca told someone, and now the tabloids are sniffing around." David sighed. "Good. The sooner the truth's out, the less pretending I'll have to do." "You sure about that?" Michael said. "You know Thompson Development lives off its reputation. If you go public, your father will—" "He already did," David interrupted. "He threatened me this morning." "What are you going to do next?" "I'm going to meet the kids. Officially." The next morning, David texted Jasmine, "I want to see them. No more hiding." Her reply came late, just a few words. "Saturday, 10 a.m. David smiled. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of purpose. But Boston never let anyone stay happy for long. By noon, Linda called, "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Richard wants to see you immediately." David arrived at the office to find his father by the window, a newspaper in his hand. On the front page, Thompson, heir of 5-year secret, and 4 identical sons. A blurry photo of him entering Dorchester, but recognizable enough. "See this?" Richard said. "This is the result of your recklessness." "It's the truth," David replied. "No, it's the death of your reputation." Richard slammed the paper on the desk. "Investors are pulling out. Rebecca's father has turned the entire financial circle against you. Your mother's in tears at home." David looked at him steadily. "I don't need a reputation if it means living a lie." "Then what do you need?" "I need to be a father." Richard said nothing, his rage caught in his throat. As David walked out, his father's voice followed, "You'll regret this." But he didn't look back. That afternoon, David sat in a small cafe in Southend, where the air smelled of coffee, rain, and slow jazz. Michael joined him, eyes full of concern. "You're burning down your career, David," he said quietly. "But I get it. Maybe you're doing what your heart wants for the first time." David gave a faint smile. "Maybe." Michael leaned back, studying him. "Are you scared?" "Yes. I've never been this scared. But I'm afraid of losing something more real than this company." Michael nodded. "Then follow that fear. Sometimes it leads to something worth more than success." That evening, back in the penthouse, David looked around the perfectly designed, space-polished wood floors, Italian leather sofa, crystal chandelier. Yet now, everything felt hollow. He picked up Rebecca's abandoned ring, turned it in his hand, then placed it in a drawer. In its place, he set down the photo of the 4 children. "If I have to lose everything to keep them," he murmured, "then it's worth it." Outside the window, Boston glowed quietly. The skyscrapers still stood tall, but for David Thompson, that night, the city felt newly born, a place where he could begin again, even if it meant starting from the ruins. Saturday morning dawned unusually clear over Boston. After days of rain, the first sunlight glowed on the red bricks of Dorchester's old buildings, making everything seem warmer, more alive. Standing before the mirror in his bedroom, David wondered what a man should wear to meet his children for the first time. How does a father dress? A business suit too formal, a sweater too forced. Ultimately, he chose a simple shirt, jeans, and a brown jacket. For the first time, he wanted to look ordinary. On the chair, 4 small bags sat neatly lined up, each with the same contents: a box of building blocks, a sketchbook, candy, and a stuffed animal. He had spent the entire night choosing them. Michael had laughed. "You're prepping for a board meeting with toddlers?" David just smiled. Probably scarier than any boardroom. The BMW stopped in front of the old apartment block. As he stepped out, a few neighbors gave him curious looks. A man in an expensive jacket stood out too easily in this neighborhood. An older woman sitting by the stoop smiled kindly. "You're looking for Jasmine, right? Apartment 2B. Take the stairs, watch the third step. It's loose." "Thank you, ma'am," he said, nodding, his heart pounding faster than usual. He knocked. For a moment, there was silence, then the sound of small footsteps. The door cracked open, and wide brown eyes peeked out. A little boy, about 5, stared up at him. "Hi. You must be Matthew, right?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Who are you?" "I'm a friend of your mum's," David said, trying to smile. Matthew studied him for a few seconds, then yelled, "Mommy, there's a man with a brown jacket at the door." Jasmine appeared. She wore a grey sweater, her hair tied back, looking a little surprised that he'd arrived precisely on time. "Come in," she said quietly. The apartment was small, maybe 600 square feet, but tidy and warm. Children's drawings covered the walls. The air smelled faintly of pancakes and cinnamon. Four plastic cups in different colors were on the table, sat on the table, each labeled with a child's name. The other 3 came running out, Mark clutching a teddy bear, Luke holding a storybook, and John biting into a pancake bigger than his face. David stood there, speechless. Nothing in his career as a CEO had prepared him for this moment. "Can we talk?" he asked Jasmine softly. She nodded. "Sit down." The 4 children crowded around, curious about the bags he carried. "What's in there?" Luke asked, eyes bright. "Gifts. For you." "Really?" John squealed, running over. David knelt and opened the bags, handing each one their own. He had made sure they were identical, afraid they might fight over who got what, a thought that had never crossed his mind until now. But they didn't. All 4 looked up and said, "Thank you." Jasmine watched quietly from the side. Something in her eyes softened, maybe for the first time. She saw not a wealthy man, but someone genuinely trying. Matthew broke the silence first. "What do you do for work?" David chuckled. I build houses." "For who?" "For people who need a place to live." "Like us?" Luke asked seriously. David glanced at Jasmine, then said, "Yes, like you." After breakfast, Jasmine invited him to stay and play with the boys. He had never done anything like that, but when the 4 of them tugged him to the floor to help with the Lego blocks, he couldn't refuse. Laughter filled the little apartment, the kind that seeps into places in your heart you didn't know were empty. By noon, when he stood to leave, John ran to him, wrapping small arms around his leg. "You'll come back, right?" David knelt, ruffling the boy's hair. "I promise." As he stepped out, Jasmine called after him, "David." He turned. "Thank you," she said, smiling softly. "For today." He nodded, but her simple thank you felt like a gentle blade, tender, and yet it made him ache to turn back. On the drive home, the city's noise faded into the background. All he could hear in his head was the sound of children laughing. For the first time, David Thompson felt truly alive. The following week, he could barely focus on work. Whenever he opened his laptop, the image of 4 little faces came to mind. He smiled, remembering John trying to attach a Lego wheel backward, or Luke asking questions too philosophical for a 5-year-old. One afternoon, during a meeting, his phone buzzed. A message from Jasmine. "Matthew has a fever. Do you know a good pediatrician?" Without hesitation, he stood up in the middle of the meeting. "I'm sorry, urgent matter." Linda looked up, startled. "Should I call your driver?" "No need," he said, grabbing his keys and heading out. 10 minutes later, he was at the Dorchester apartment. Jasmine opened the door, worry etched on her face. "You really came?" "Of course." Matthew lay on the couch, cheeks flushed, forehead hot. David touched his brow gently. "It's okay, just a mild fever," he said, immediately calling his family doctor. 2 hours later, the boy was asleep, breathing evenly again. Jasmine sat nearby, her expression easing. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She said nothing. The warm light fell softly on them, 2 adults, no longer separated by status, both quietly terrified of losing the children they loved. When David finally got up to leave, Mark handed him a piece of paper. "I drew this," the boy said. It was a picture of 6 people holding hands, 4 children, a tall man, and a long-haired woman. Beneath it, in shaky letters, were the words, "My family." David's throat tightened. "Who's this?" "You, Mom, my brothers, and me." He held the drawing, unable to speak. That night, he didn't turn on the lights in the penthouse. He stared at the picture on his phone until dawn began to color the sky. The next morning, he texted Jasmine, "Can I take the kids out on Sunday? Just the park?" Her reply came, "All right, but don't promise what you can't keep." "I'm not promising," he wrote back. "I'm certain." Sunday arrived bright and warm. At Franklin Park, David showed up carrying 4 ice cream cones. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed so much. The boys ran and shouted under the sunlight, their joy infectious. Jasmine sat on a nearby bench, watching. Her gaze toward him had changed, no longer guarded, but touched with a quiet trust, a flicker of surprise, and somewhere deep in it, hope. When it was time to leave, John ran to hug him again. "Uncle David, are you going home?" David paused. "Yes, I am, but I'll come back, okay?" John nodded, smiling, his cheeks smeared with ice cream. That night, David opened his notebook, something he hadn't done for himself in years, and began to write, "Today, I'm not the head of a company. I'm just a man learning how to be a father. And maybe this is the first project I've ever taken on that doesn't need a plan, only a heart." He set the pen down and smiled. Outside the window, Boston shimmered with light. Amid the city's pulse, David knew one thing: he wouldn't miss his chance this time. Monday morning, winter sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the Thompson development office, falling across the desk where David sat, pen in hand, unable to write. Since learning he had children, everything about his old world had begun to feel foreign. He used to love the shimmer of glass towers, the feeling of standing high above the city and looking down at everything he'd built. But now, surrounded by million-dollar contracts and executive memos, he saw only emptiness. "Mr. Thompson?" Linda, his assistant, appeared in the doorway. "You have a meeting with the investors at 9. "Move it to 10, David said, his tone quiet. "But, Linda," he looked up, his gaze calm. "I'll be there at 10. When the door closed, he exhaled. He took out Mark's drawing from the drawer, the one labeled "My Family." He placed it on the desk, right on top of the embossed logo that read Thompson Development Group. 2 worlds lay side by side and they could not coexist. David drove to Dorchester 3 days later, as he did now most mornings. From the parking spot, he saw Jasmine walking the children to school. The Boston air was sharp and cold, their breath misting white, but the sound of the kids' laughter warmed him more than any expensive coat could. "Good morning," he said as they approached. Jasmine looked a little surprised. "You're here early. I wanted to take the kids to school. Do you even know the way?" "No, but I've got GPS," he replied with a grin. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "All right." Matthew pointed out each block on the drive, narrating like a tiny tour guide. "That place has the best donuts. And that one," Luke said, "has a fat cat that sleeps on the roof. We see it every day." David laughed, driving slowly, trying to memorize every detail. When they reached the school, Jasmine started to say goodbye, but Matthew grabbed David's hand. "You going to a meeting now?" "Yeah. I have meetings every morning too," Matthew said seriously. "At school." David chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Then do your best, little man." On the way back, Jasmine glanced at him. "You've changed a lot." "I'm just relearning everything," he said. "From the beginning." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "You know, I never thought you'd be this kind of man." "What kind?" "Not one who only cares about money." David smiled faintly. "Maybe I used to be." They fell silent again. Outside, Boston stretched out a city that felt at once strange and familiar. When David returned to the office that afternoon, Richard was waiting in the conference room. "David," his father began coldly, "I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time in Dorchester, even taking the children to school. The press is getting curious. Let them be. Do you know what this family's reputation was built on? Distance. David met his father's eyes, steady and unflinching. That distance is why you don't really know who I am and why I rarely knew I had children. The words struck Richard silent. David rose from his chair. His voice was calm, but every word deliberate. I'm done living in fear of public opinion. I choose family. As he walked out, Richard stayed frozen, where he stood, his anger wavering into something else, something almost like doubt. David and Jasmine took the boys to Charles River Park the following week. The breeze was gentle, the trees scattered with gold leaves. They sat on the grass, eating sandwiches and laughing together, an ordinary family among dozens of others. Jasmine watched as David tied Mark's shoelace, her expression softening. You know, she said quietly, they've never had a man take them out like this. David looked up. Thank you for letting me. Don't thank me. She hesitated. I'm scared. Of what? That one day you'll disappear. Like everything good in my life, it comes fast, and then it's gone. David shook his head. I already disappeared once. I won't again. They sat together watching the boys chase each other, their laughter carrying through the wind. The world of suits, contracts, and ambition felt distant at that moment. David saw sunlight glinting on his children's dark hair, saw Jasmine smile quietly in the light, and knew this was the real life. But happiness, he realized, always comes with a cost. That evening, as David walked Jasmine and the kids home, a tall, older woman was waiting by the door, silver hair neatly pinned, posture straight. David Thompson, isn't it? She said, her voice firm. Yes. And you are? Eleanor Williams, Jasmine's mother. Jasmine stopped short, startled. Mum, you didn't tell me he's been coming around. Eleanor's gaze cut like glass. You've hurt my daughter enough. Don't make her suffer more. Mom, Jasmine interrupted, embarrassed. David stayed calm. I understand your anger, Mrs. Williams, but I want to be their father. Father? She gave a bitter laugh. Don't use that word so lightly. My daughter raised those children alone for 5 years, working herself to exhaustion while you lived at the top of Boston. She turned to Jasmine. Don't forget that. The air went heavy. David didn't argue. He said quietly, if it takes time, I'll wait. But I'm not leaving again. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then turned away. We'll see how long that promise lasts. When she disappeared inside, Jasmine stood still, the wind lifting strands of her hair. I'm sorry, she murmured. She's just protecting us. I understand, David said gently. I'll earn her trust. That night, back in his penthouse, David stood by the window, looking down at the glowing maze of the city. Boston glittered as always, but for the first time, it looked lonely. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo of the 5 in the park. Between two worlds, he thought. I have to choose one. He sat down and began typing his resignation letter to the board, to the Thompson Development Board. I, David Thompson, step down from my position as Chief Executive Officer to dedicate my time to community-focused projects in Boston. This is a personal decision, unrelated to financial or public matters. The company will understand and support it. Sincerely, David Thompson. He signed his name and exhaled a long, freeing breath. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe, to live as his heart told him to. Outside, Boston roared on, restless and alive, but there was a peace he had never known within David Thompson's quiet apartment. And across the city, in a small Dorchester flat, 4 children slept, soundly unaware that, from this moment on, their lives and their fathers had changed forever. Winter arrived early that year. The wind from the Charles River lashed against the glass of Thompson Tower, howling like the city was grieving. On the 38th floor, the office that had once been David's world now stood empty. His name had been taken down from the executive board. A new director had been appointed, and the black leather chair he once commanded was now just another piece of cold furniture. David stood alone in the room, holding a cardboard box filled with what little remained of his past life. Mark's drawing, a leather notebook, and a few old photos. Linda, his loyal assistant, appeared in the doorway. You're really leaving? He nodded. It's time. Mr. Richard won't be pleased. David smiled faintly. He never was, no matter what I did. She hesitated, then said quietly, I know it's not my place, but what you're doing, it's right. At least, that's what I believe. David gave her hand a brief, grateful squeeze before walking out, leaving behind the place where he had spent years trying to prove something to his father, only to learn, in the end, that nothing was worth more than family. News of his resignation spread faster than the storm. Headlines screamed across every Boston paper, Thompson heir abandons empire amid scandal. Who is Jasmine Williams, the woman who cost a fortune his name? Tabloids devoured every detail. Photos of Jasmine and the children, taken secretly outside their school, appeared online. The captions were cruel. From maid to mother of a mogul's 4 sons, Jasmine's hands trembled as she scrolled. She dropped her phone onto the couch, tears spilling down her face. Oh God, what are they saying about me? Her mother, Eleanor, walked in, voice stern. I told you, Jasmine, you can't trust his world. Mom, he's not like them. No one but you believes that. Jasmine buried her face in her hands. They're letting me go from the hotel. They said my name's bad for business. See, Eleanor gripped her shoulders. This is who they are. That world was never meant for you. Meanwhile, Victoria Thompson sat at the long dining table in Beacon Hill. A newspaper spread before her. Across from her, Richard set down his glass of wine, fury in his eyes. I told him to stop, he thundered. Now look, all of Boston is laughing at the Thompsons. Victoria stayed silent, her gaze resting on a photo of David holding the children in a park. Something in his expression caught her a light she hadn't seen in years. Richard, she said softly, look at his face. He's smiling. He's never smiled like that before. Smiling? Richard spat. He's lost everything, and you think that's worth a smile? He's destroying our name. Victoria said nothing more. Inside her, 2 halves warred the dutiful matriarch who had built her life beside Richard, and the mother who remembered a little boy running through the garden, laughing freely before ambition consumed their home. That night, David drove through the snow to Dorchester. Inside, he found Jasmine on the couch, head in her hands, newspapers scattered like debris around her. Jasmine, she looked up, eyes red and weary. See? They've turned me into a headline, into garbage. He sat beside her, taking her trembling hands. I'm sorry. I should have protected you. You can't protect me from your world, David. It will never accept me. Her words hit harder than any of his father's. Then let me build a new world, he said quietly. From nothing, if I have to. No more Thompson. She shook her head, tears falling. You don't understand. It's not just money or fame. It's your life. If you walk away, you lose everything. So what? He said. If I have you and the kids, I've already won. Jasmine broke down, torn between fear and belief. David held her close as the wind howled through the window, the storm outside, no fiercer than the one inside their hearts. 3 days later, the real storm came. A blizzard swallowed Boston, the city blanketed in white. Power failed across Dorchester. Jasmine lit the fireplace and wrapped the children in blankets. Soon, Mark began coughing and burning with fever. Oh no, she whispered. Matthew, get the thermometer. David was already on his way when his phone rang. Jasmine's voice shook. Mark's burning up. I don't know what to do. Stay calm. I'm coming now. He drove through the blizzard, his tires sliding over snow, and the world outside was a blur of white and wind. By the time he reached her apartment, he was half frozen. Mark lay limp and flushed. David scooped him into his arms, wrapping him tight. We're going to the hospital. No, the roads are closed, Jasmine cried. David looked around, mind racing. I've got the SUV. It'll make it. 15 minutes later, the vehicle pushed through drifts of snow, headlights slicing through the whiteout. Jasmine held Mark close, the other boys huddled in the back, eyes wide and wet. Will he be okay? Luke whispered. Yes, sweetheart, Jasmine said, though her voice trembled. At the hospital, doctors rushed them in. Jasmine sat outside the emergency room, hands clasped, whispering prayers. David stood beside her, silent, his hand steady on her shoulder. 2 hours passed before the doctor emerged. You were lucky. It's viral, but another hour, and he might have seized. Jasmine broke down, tears of relief streaming. David let out a long breath, tears in his own eyes. Inside the room, Mark slept soundly, still clutching his teddy bear. Jasmine kissed his forehead gently. Watching her, David's chest ached with love, guilt, and awe. That night, he stayed with her in the quiet hospital room, both of them watching the soft pulse of the heart monitor light. "Did you go through all this alone?" he whispered. "More times than I can count." He took her hand. Never again. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight hit the snow, turning Boston into something dazzling and new. As they exited the hospital, a familiar voice called, "David." He froze. "Mom?" Victoria stood by the car, wrapped in a wool coat. Her expression was gentle, her eyes soft. "I saw the news. And the photo. I wanted to see them for myself." She knelt to look at the children, Mark, pale but smiling. Matthew, Luke, and John, clutching her coat shyly. "They're beautiful," she murmured. Jasmine watched, unsure what to say. Victoria turned to her. "You have every reason not to trust me, but if you'll allow it, I want to help." Jasmine glanced at David, then nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." They stood together under the bright sun against the snow, a high society woman, a working-class mother, 4 small children, and a man who had lost everything but found what mattered most. As they turned to leave, Victoria said quietly to her son, "Maybe happiness doesn't come from perfection, David. Maybe it's born from what we're brave enough to protect." David smiled. "I'll remember that, Mom." On the drive back to Dorchester, Jasmine sat in the passenger seat, her hand brushing his. Outside, Boston was still cold, but inside the car, warmth spread easily between them. The storm had passed, and within David Thompson, a new fire burned, the fire of love, courage, and a family worth everything he had to lose. February came, and the snow on Dorchester's red brick rooftops began to melt. Small puddles glimmered under the pale winter sun, while inside the modest second-floor apartment, Jasmine hung freshly washed clothes on a wire stretched across the balcony. John's laughter echoed from the kitchen, blending with the smell of baking and the familiar sounds of an ordinary, peaceful day. David sat in the living room, sleeves rolled up, helping Luke with his homework. He read each question carefully, patient in a way he never thought he could be. "Dad," Luke asked, "did I spell it right?" David smiled, correcting him gently. "The word sky ends with a Y, buddy." "Like this?" the boy asked, rewriting the word. "Perfect." From the kitchen, Jasmine glanced over, lips curving softly. The sight of the man who once seemed so distant now sitting on the floor beside her son, reading, laughing, filled her heart with quiet warmth. But peace, as always, never lasted long. That afternoon, after the children had gone to bed, came a knock at the door. The downstairs neighbor stood there, holding a large white envelope. "Jasmine, this came for you. From the building management. Thank you." Jasmine opened it and froze after the first few lines. "Notice of acquisition and redevelopment of Dorchester East residential area. Evacuation required within 30 days. Her heart sank. She turned the page and, in the upper right corner, saw a familiar logo in bold, Thompson Development Group. Impossible. That evening, when David arrived, Jasmine tossed the envelope onto the table, her voice shaking. "Did you know about this?" He picked it up, read it, and his expression fell. "You didn't, did you?" she pressed. "Your father's still running the company, isn't he?" "I left months ago," he said slowly. "I thought they'd frozen the project." "Well, they didn't. They're pushing everyone out." David sank into a chair, the words hitting him like a blow to the chest. "Jasmine, I swear I had no idea. I'll talk to my father." Her arms folded across her chest, her voice breaking. "Don't just talk, David. This is our home. Do you understand that?" He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I understand." The next morning, David walked back into Thompson Development, not as CEO, but as the owner's son. Heads turned as he strode down the corridor and into his father's office. "Dorchester East?" he said flatly. "What are you doing?" Richard didn't look up from the file in front of him. Redevelopment. The plan's been in motion for years. You mean you're evicting dozens of families, including Jasmine and my children? Richard's gaze lifted, calm and cold. You don't understand, David. It's business. That area is a slum. Thompson Development can turn it into high-end condos. Everyone benefits. No. Only the rich benefit. Richard slammed his pen down. You sound like one of those activists now. Have you forgotten who you are? No, David said quietly. I've just finally remembered. Father and son stood facing each other, two men, two generations, two worlds colliding under the sterile light of a corporate boardroom. What do you want from me? Richard asked at last. I want you to stop this project, at least the part that affects Jasmine's neighborhood. I can't. If we pull that block, the whole plan collapses. The investors will revolt. Then I'll talk to them myself. No one listens to a man who quit. Then I'll make them listen. David walked out, leaving Richard staring after him. For the first time, the older man saw his son's reflection in himself, but it was only different in one thing. David fought not for power but love. News of the Dorchester East project spread quickly. Protests broke out. Signs hung from balconies. Headlines read, Thompson Development forcing hundreds of families out. And one line in a local paper ignited a firestorm. Among those affected the mother of David Thompson's 4 children. David drove straight to Dorchester, stepping into a crowd of angry residents. An older man blocked his path. You're a Thompson, aren't you? Why are you doing this to us? It's not me, David said. I'm here to help. But no one believed him. He understood trust couldn't be asked for, only earned. Jasmine appeared from the crowd, her expression torn between pride and fear. You didn't have to come, she said quietly. I did, he answered. If I don't, they'll think I'm just like him. At that moment, another car pulled up. Victoria stepped out, elegant, calm, and carrying a checkbook. But it wasn't for a deal, it was for a donation to the families being displaced. Mom? David asked, stunned. She smiled faintly. Not every Thompson lost their heart. Her presence silenced the cameras. For the first time, the narrative began to shift. David seized the moment, stepping before the microphones. Dorchester doesn't need another luxury tower, he said. It needs homes, real homes. Thompson Development was founded on trust, and I intend to restore that. If my father won't stop this project, I will. Starting today, I'm launching the Home for All Foundation, a community trust to buy back Dorchester East, stabilize housing prices, and rebuild this neighborhood for its residents, not replace them. Applause broke through the crowd. Jasmine stood behind him, tears spilling silently. That night, every news channel in Boston ran the story. David Thompson declares war on his father's company. At Beacon Hill, Richard watched the broadcast in silence. Victoria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Do you see? She said softly. He's not fighting you. He's protecting the same dream you once had. Richard didn't reply, but her words struck deep. He remembered his beginnings, the young man who promised to build homes for everyone, before ambition buried that promise under steel and profit. A week later, the Thompson board convened an emergency meeting. David entered the room, no longer the company's head, just a man with something true to say. Gentlemen, he began, we build homes. But have we ever stopped to ask who gets to live in them? If only the wealthy could. This city we love wouldn't be Boston. Silence filled the room. Then one elderly board member nodded slowly. You sound just like your grandfather, he said. He once said those same words. When David walked out, Richard was still seated. Neither of them had won, but something in his father's eyes, something heavy and human, had softened. That afternoon, Jasmine received a new letter. Project Dorchester East indefinitely suspended pending review of community redevelopment plan. She read it repeatedly, then ran outside where David was waiting. You did it. He smiled, exhaustion and joy bright in his eyes. We did. The children came tumbling out, cheering, clinging to their father's legs. Dad, did you win? John shouted. David laughed. Yeah, but the best win is that we still have our home. That night, the entire neighborhood of Dorchester glowed with lights. Families gathered to celebrate. Jasmine baked, Victoria joined them, holding her grandsons, while David sat on the porch, watching the laughter ripple through the streets. In the winter night, Dorchester shone as brightly as Beacon Hill, and for the first time, the foundation of a new world was being laid not from steel or concrete, but from faith, compassion, and the simple, unshakable belief that home should belong to everyone. After the Dorchester ordeal, the media storm finally quieted, but the old apartment where Jasmine and the children lived still needed repairs. The heating system was broken, and the pipes leaked. Not wanting the kids to endure the cold Boston spring, David offered a temporary solution. "At your place?" Jasmine repeated, uncertain. "Just for a few weeks," David explained. "There's plenty of room, and it's safe." She studied him for a long moment. Her mind said it made sense. Her heart wasn't so sure. Living under the same roof as the man who had once been her boss, the one who had unknowingly changed her life forever, wouldn't be simple. "Fine," she said at last, "but only temporarily, and we keep our own routines." "Deal," David said, smiling. 3 days later, his silver SUV pulled up in front of a tall building in Beacon Hill. When the doors opened, the children's mouths dropped. The grand lobby gleamed with marble floors, high ceilings, and golden light. "Wow," Luke whispered. "It's like a movie." "No running," Jasmine warned. "This is someone else's home." David chuckled. "No, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, starting today, it's yours too." The elevator opened on the 20th floor. When they stepped into the penthouse, bright, sleek, and pristine, Jasmine froze. It was like stepping into a perfect, white, and cold magazine spread. "Careful," she gasped, as John darted toward the white leather sofa. David stopped him with a grin. "I think I need a few colorful rugs." Within hours, the penthouse transformed. Tiny shoes lined up by the door. Toys, books, and stuffed animals claimed half the living room. The scent of pancakes filled the air. David looked around, laughing softly. "I used to think I needed a quiet home. I guess I was wrong. Quiet is what lonely people like," Jasmine said gently. "Families need noise." That evening, he helped the boys set up makeshift beds in the living room. "We'll call this our temporary base," he said, spreading blankets. "So you're the general?" Matthew asked. "No," David grinned. "I'm the chef and night guard." Jasmine couldn't help but smile. The man who once lived by strict schedules was now carefully tucking 4 sleepy children. When they finally drifted off, she said softly, "Maybe you're learning a skill money can't buy." He looked up. "What skill is that?" "Being a father." Their eyes met. No more words were needed. The warmth between them filled the silence, closing the space between two worlds. The first week passed in a blur of small tests. On Monday morning, David discovered the fridge was nearly empty. He rushed to the store and returned with bags of gourmet steaks, artisan cheese, and Italian wine. "You're feeding the kids steak and grape juice?" Jasmine crossed her arms. "I thought they'd like it. They need cereal and milk, not 5-star dining." David raised an eyebrow. "And the wine?" "For the adults, after bedtime." They both laughed. They cooked their first meal together that night, turning the sleek kitchen into a battlefield. The sauce was splattered, John spilled flour, and Luke asked 10 questions in a minute. Jasmine tried to clean while David tried not to laugh. In the end, they sat on the floor, exhausted, eating instant noodles. "Welcome to real parenthood," she said, half teasing. "This reality," he replied with a wink, "tastes better than steak." By Saturday, Victoria came to visit. She brought cookies and toys for the children. For the first time, Jasmine didn't feel nervous opening the door. Victoria knelt to eye level with the boys. "I have gifts for each of you," she said, "but only if you finish your vegetables first." John grimaced. Luke asked, "If I eat 2 helpings, can I open 2 gifts?" She laughed. "Deal." That evening, after she left, Jasmine stood by the window, watching the sunset cast Boston in shades of orange. "She's different," Jasmine murmured. "Yes," David said, nodding. "She's learning how to be a grandmother just like I'm learning to be a dad." Later that night, Jasmine sat at the kitchen table reading with the children asleep. David passed by and paused. "What are you reading?" Early education, she said. I want to know how to raise them better. I think you're already doing great. She smiled faintly. No, I spent 5 years surviving. Now, I want to live. David poured her a glass of wine and set it before her. Then let's live, he said quietly. Together, no more surviving. Jasmine looked up. His eyes were warm, steady, no longer the gaze of a man who gave orders, but of one who loved. She laughed softly. You just broke a rule. What rule? Don't fall for the person you live with. David tilted his head. Can we move that rule to tomorrow? They both laughed, the sound light and easy, filling the room with something tender and real. 3 weeks later, the penthouse no longer looked like the pristine home of a bachelor. It had become a home. Children's drawings taped to the walls, Lego pieces on the floor, a fridge stocked with milk and ice cream. As David prepared for work one morning, John hugged his leg. Dad, don't go to work. Stay and play. David crouched down. If I don't work, who'll buy ice cream for you guys? Then work fast and come home early. Deal? He left with a smile he hadn't worn in years. At the office, Lauren looked at him curiously. You look different. How so? Like someone who finally has a reason to live. That evening when he returned, Jasmine and the kids were curled up watching cartoons. Her head rested against the sofa, hair a little messy, eyes half closed. For the first time, he thought, this is home. Not the penthouse, not the city skyline this. When the TV flicked off, Jasmine turned to him. I'm still looking for somewhere temporary while they finish the Dorchester repairs. David studied her quietly. You don't need to, he said. You and the kids can stay, if you want. She hesitated, ready to protest, but saw 4 hopeful faces approaching her. We'll think about it, she said softly. No need, he replied with a smile. This place was already yours. She fell silent, not from doubt, but from emotion too deep for words. That night, as David turned off the lights, he looked at the glittering Boston skyline. Once, he believed the city belonged to him because he owned its towers, projects, and shares. But now he understood Boston was his only because they were in it. March in Boston was cold but full of sunlight. The snow had melted, leaving damp streaks along the streets. Life for the 6 of them was finally finding rhythm inside the penthouse. In the mornings, David brewed coffee while Jasmine made breakfast, and the 4 boys buzzed around the table like birds. Mom, I get to read a poem in class today, Luke said proudly, face glowing. That's wonderful, Jasmine smiled. Remember loud and clear. Mark, however, sat quietly, stirring his milk without touching it. His eyes were distant, his shoulders small. David noticed. Hey, buddy, he asked gently. You okay? Mark nodded. I'm fine. But Jasmine knew that tone, how her second son hid his feelings behind small words. That afternoon, her phone rang. The teacher's voice came through the speaker, cautious but kind. Miss Williams, Mark was teased today. Some boys said he doesn't have a real father. Jasmine froze. Her chest tightened. Thank you, she managed. I'll talk to the principal. When she got home, she found Mark sitting alone on the sofa, eyes down. David was in the kitchen, unaware of what had happened. Sweetheart, Jasmine said softly, taking a seat beside him. Did something happen at school? He shook his head. David came over, crouching in front of him. Mark, look at me. What's going on? Silence. Then, in a trembling voice, the boy said, They said I don't have a dad, that you're just pretending to be my dad for fun. The room fell still. David's breath caught. He sat down slowly, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. Mark, look at me, he said quietly. The boy lifted his tear-filled eyes. I might have missed the first 5 years of your life, David said. But since the day I found out about you, I've never left. Not for a single day. I'm your real dad, because I love you. That's what makes it real. Okay? Mark broke down, throwing his arms around his father's neck. Jasmine stood there, tears sliding down her cheeks. The man who once feared emotion was now holding his child, whispering, and in that sight, all the years of loss seemed to fade. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, David stepped out onto the balcony. Boston shimmered beneath the stars. Jasmine joined him, wrapping a scarf around her shoulders. "You know," she said softly, "when Mark was 3, he asked me where his father was. I told him, 'Far away, but you have me.'" She paused. "Now, I can tell him something different." David turned to her and took her hand. "Tell him his father was searching," he said, "and he finally found his way home." In the days that followed, David threw himself into his new role. He didn't just drive the boys to school. He stayed to kick a ball around, helped them with projects, baked with Jasmine on weekends, and read bedtime stories each night. One afternoon, while drawing with Luke, the boy asked, "Dad, did Grandpa play with you when you were my age?" David hesitated. "No, son. He was always busy." Luke studied him thoughtfully. "You'll be different from Grandpa, right?" David smiled, kissing his son's forehead. "I promise." At the office, Lauren noticed the shift. "You've started scheduling morning meetings so you can leave early." "The old Thompson would never do that." David laughed. "The old Thompson lived in a house. This one lives in a family." On Friday evening, Jasmine gathered the boys in the kitchen. "You've got to stir gently," she said, laughing as she guided their small hands. John spilled milk across the counter. Matthew groaned dramatically. Luke burst out laughing, and Mark quietly cleaned up the mess. Watching them, David felt a warmth so complete it hurt a little. After dinner, as he helped Jasmine with the dishes, she said, "You know, Mark's been different lately. He laughs more, sleeps better." David smiled. "Because he knows he's loved." Jasmine turned to him. "You're becoming the man they need." He met her gaze, his voice low. "And you're the woman I need." The air between them softened, charged with something unspoken. "Don't say that," she whispered. "You have your work, your name, your city. I'm just—" "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't shrink yourself. You're the reason I understand what any of that truly means." In that moment, Jasmine saw in his eyes not the man who once stood above the world, but one who had walked through loss, learned how to stay, and finally how to love. That same night in Beacon Hill, Victoria sat in her study, rereading an old article titled "David Thompson and the Four Sons of Dorchester." She paused on a photograph of her son holding Mark in the hospital. Richard glanced at it and sighed. "He's wasting his potential." Victoria replied quietly, "No, Richard, he's using his heart." The next day, the whole family went to Boston's public garden, where everything had once begun. Matthew carried a ball, Luke a box of cookies, John tugged at his father's sleeve to go on the swings, and Mark held his mother's hand. David looked around, sunlight falling across their shoulders, the lake shimmering nearby. He realized that this was the sound of laughter carried by the wind, these small hands gripping his. This was what he had been searching for in every tower he ever built. A soft breeze stirred, carrying the scent of early spring. Jasmine tilted her head. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. David smiled. "That maybe, for the first time in my life, I'm truly home." April arrived with Boston's long, heavy rains. The trees began budging on Beacon Street, and the city's cafes found their rhythm again. But inside David's penthouse, that fragile peace was already trembling beneath an unexpected knock. It was a Monday morning. Jasmine was making breakfast for the boys when the doorbell rang. David opened it and froze. Richard Thompson was standing there, cane in hand and rein on his shoulders. His eyes were colder than the weather. "May I come in?" The air inside seemed to tighten. Jasmine looked up in surprise. The children fell silent. "Of course," David said quietly. "Come in." Richard stepped inside. His gaze swept across the apartment once spotless and sterile, now filled with color, laughter, and the unmistakable chaos of children. He stopped at the refrigerator, where Mark's drawing hung crookedly. 6 figures holding hands beneath a shaky title, "The Thompsons." "You still let them use our name?" Richard asked slowly. "They're Thompsons," David replied, "whether you choose to see it or not." Silence hung between them for several seconds before Richard placed his cane aside. "I didn't come to argue," he said. "I came to make an offer." "An offer?" "Come back to the company. The board wants you to return as CEO, but on one condition." His eyes shifted toward Jasmine. "You end this relationship." Thompson can't stay tied to this kind of story forever. The words hit like a blade. Jasmine froze. David clenched his fists, voice rough. You still don't understand. It's because of those stories that I left. Richard's jaw tightened. You can't live on feelings, David. Someday, those children will know their father gave up an empire for a woman. And he'll be proud of that, Jasmine said softly, tears in her eyes. Richard turned to her. You think love alone can raise 4 children? No, she said calmly. But love can teach them how to be human. For once, the older man had no answer. David stepped closer. You always said Thompson was built on trust. But there's no trust without a heart behind it. You're choosing emotion over responsibility. Richard shot back. No, David replied quietly. I'm choosing responsibility to my heart. Richard picked up his cane and turned toward the door. I hope you won't regret it. Dad, David called after him. Do you? The older man stopped. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. The day I raised a son who didn't know what love was. Maybe that's my only regret. The door closed. Rain whispered against the glass. Jasmine went to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? He shook his head. No, but I know I'm right. She wrapped her arms around him, and outside, Boston's rain fell steady and slow, washing away years of pride and distance between 2 men who shared a name. A week later, Thompson Development held its annual press conference. On stage, Richard stood before the cameras. I will be stepping down as chairman of the board, he announced. From today, my successor will be David Thompson. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions until Richard raised a hand. I once believed a strong name mattered more than an honest heart, he said. My son taught me otherwise. The words spread through Boston like the first breath of spring. That afternoon, David wasn't at the conference. He was at home, helping Mark glue together a cardboard model for school. Jasmine turned on the TV and saw Richard's apology broadcast live. You should see this, she said softly. David glanced up and smiled faintly. I heard. You're not going to say anything? No need, he said. Sometimes silence is forgiveness. Later that day, Victoria called. Her voice trembled with emotion. Your father wants to see the whole family at the garden behind Beacon Hill. When they arrived, Richard was waiting. He wasn't in a suit, just a grey sweater, his expression gentler than they'd ever seen. The 4 boys hesitated behind Jasmine. Come here, boys, Richard said, his voice rough but warm. Mark stepped forward first. Who are you? I'm your grandfather. Really? Really. And I brought each of you a gift. If you'll let me call you my grandsons. A hush, then laughter. The boys rushed toward him, their voices ringing through the garden. Jasmine watched, her eyes shining, and when she turned, she saw tears glinting in David's. When the children ran off to play, Richard faced his son. I don't know how to apologize for all of it. Start, David said softly, by calling her by her name. Richard turned to Jasmine. Jasmine, thank you for teaching my son how to be a father. She smiled through tears. And thank you for letting him become the husband he was meant to be. Richard paused, then chuckled. No wedding yet, but I just heard the news. David laughed, glancing at Jasmine. I haven't even asked. What are you waiting for? She teased, eyes glistening. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Jasmine Williams, he said softly, you turned my life into a home. Please, stay in it forever. The boys squealed. John shouted, Say yes, Mom. Jasmine laughed through her tears. Yes, I do. Applause, laughter, and 4 happy voices blended with the whisper of the spring wind. Richard watched them, his aged eyes gleaming with something he'd forgotten long ago, faith. That night, after everyone had gone, David and Jasmine sat on the wooden porch, the city glowing below. Are you afraid? He asked. Of what? That one day, I'll lose this. She leaned her head against his shoulder. If you've taught me anything, it's this. Happiness isn't something we find, it's something we choose to keep every day. He smiled, threading his fingers through hers. Above them, Boston's lights shimmered twin stars reflected in 2 eyes that had finally found home. June came, drenching Boston in sunlight. The sky was a perfect blue, the trees along the Charles River bursting into full green. Like David Thompson's life, the city seemed to wake from a long sleep. A wedding was being prepared on a small hill south of Beacon Hill, among white daisies and soft grass. It wasn't grand or loud, just close friends, a few neighbors from Dorchester, and the Thompson family complete, but simple. In a small wooden room by the garden, Jasmine stood in her white dress, lavender flowers embroidered along the collar. Victoria helped her fasten the veil, her eyes warm with motherly affection. "You look beautiful," she said. "Beautiful in a way that hides nothing." Jasmine smiled, squeezing her hand. "I never thought this day would come." "Because you were afraid?" "Because I thought I didn't deserve it." Victoria studied her momentarily, then said softly, "Sometimes we deserve not because we're perfect, but because we love without holding back." Outside, the boys were running around the garden. Matthew straightened his brother's bow tie. Mark held a tiny bouquet of daisies. Luke carried the wedding rings in a red box, and John chased a paper butterfly. David watched them, smiling. He wore a grey suit, his tie the color of the sea, hair tousled by the wind. Michael, his best friend and now officiant, clapped him on the shoulder. "You've come a long way, Thompson." "Yeah," David said, gazing out over the hill. "From the highest floor in the city to this small garden. But only here do I feel like I've finally touched the ground." The piano began soft and clear. Jasmine stepped out, every step slow and certain in the golden light. Petals floated through the air like tiny blessings. As she walked closer, David realized every lost year, every wrong turn had led him here to this one right moment. "You came," he whispered. "And I'm not leaving again," she said, trembling. They stood hand in hand as Michael smiled. "David," he began, "do you promise to love, to hold, and never run from this woman, no matter how life changes?" David looked at Jasmine, sunlight in his eyes. "I promise." "Jasmine," Michael continued, "do you promise to trust him, to walk beside him through calm and storm alike?" She laughed softly, eyes glistening. "I've already walked through storms and I still choose him. So yes, I promise." Applause burst through the garden. The boys rushed forward, wrapping their parents in laughter and arms. "Are you and Mom married now?" John asked, wide-eyed. "Yes," David smiled. "Now we all share the same name." "Then can we eat cake?" Luke chimed in. Jasmine laughed. "In just a bit, little man." Beneath the bright music and warm sunlight, they walked together through the floral arch, the gate at the end of one journey, and the start of peace. 3 years later, Boston was still radiant as ever. The once sterile penthouse had become a real home. David's office turned into a playroom, white walls covered with children's drawings, and the terrace blooming with Jasmine's lavender. David was no longer CEO of Thompson Development. He had founded the Home for All Foundation, building affordable homes across Massachusetts. People no longer called him the heir, but something far truer, Mr. Thompson, the builder of homes. One morning, Mark, now 8, ran into his father's study. "Dad, I have a school essay, my hero. I wrote about you." David smiled, pulling him close. "The real hero is your mom, you know." Mark shook his head. "No, Mom's a miracle. You're a hero because you didn't give up." At the door, Jasmine overheard, her lips curving, her eyes warm as sunrise. The family sat on the rooftop that evening, watching the city light up. "Dad," Luke asked, "when you were my age, what did you dream of?" David thought for a moment. "I dreamed of having a home. Do you have one now?" He looked around 4 little faces, Jasmine's head on his shoulder, laughter floating in the air. "Yes," he said softly, "and I'll never leave it." A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender across the terrace. Jasmine turned to him. "Do you ever wonder what life would be like if we hadn't met?" David shook his head. "If I hadn't met you, I'd still live in skyscrapers but without a single roof to call home." She smiled, leaning into him. Below them, Boston glimmered like a ribbon of stars. David whispered, his voice tender and certain, "I used to think home was something I built. Now I know home is where someone waits for me." Jasmine's reply was soft as the night. "And where we're loved, no matter what the world becomes." They fell quiet, watching their children doze off amid pillows, the hum of the city fading into the distance. The world outside stayed busy, restless, but inside that small home, everything was still. And so the story closed, not with fireworks, but with the quiet breath of 6 souls who had learned that sometimes the most remarkable thing we can ever build isn't the tallest tower, but a home that someone longs to return to.